Joining me now is Yagana Turbati, Iran correspondent for the New York Times and co-author of the new book, Stolen Revolution, Betrayal and Hope in Modern Iran. Yagana, I'm glad to have you here because I'd like to talk about these 6 days of public ceremonies for the late Ayatollah Khamenei. He was killed in that joint U.S.-Israeli airstrike on his compound on the very first day of the war. And you wrote about foreign dignitaries coming to Tehran from China, Russia, Oman, Pakistan. Why are these ceremonies so important to the Iranian government, and why are they happening 4 months later?
Hi, Alex. I think what the Iranian government is trying to present over this sort of week of events is really that it has endured, that it is capable of putting on a really elaborate procession of events, and that, it's united. So, we've seen Iranian officials exhorting the Iranian people to come out, no matter their political persuasion. They have explicitly said this, and they have tied sort of the million-strong participation of people in these ceremonies to really sort of showing the world and showing Iran's enemies that society is united behind this government, and that this government has remained in place. And so I think that is really the aim of the government as it kind of plans and puts on these events over the next few days.
Okay, but that said, and notably, the Ayatollah's second son, Mojtaba Khamenei, who formally succeeded his father as supreme leader back on March 4th, he has not been seen in public. What do we know about his current state, and how do Iranians feel about the current government? I'm sure there is a very wide variety of answers to that.
Right. I mean, that sort of desire to present Iran's government as being kind of continuous and having this continuity between the first Khamenei and now the second Khamenei is sort of challenged by the fact that we have not seen Mojtaba Khamenei in public since he was named to be Iran's most powerful man in March. And so that is sort of one element that kind of detracts from this effort by the government. And I think the other is that, the Iranian government, members of it, officials have spoken of the need for sort of national reconciliation, of kind of bridging the gaps within different political entities and political parties and persuasions. Because, of course, right before this war started in January, masses of Iranians went out into the street and asked for and demanded an end to this very government. And they were greeted by bullets. Thousands of them were killed by government forces. And so this idea of kind of a unified society is really challenged by that. And we're seeing that this crackdown that the government has been participating in and engaging in on civil society since the war especially has continued unabated, even through this week as it's planning to put on this funeral.
Speaking of bullets, let's turn to this Washington Post headline. U.S. warned Iran about Israel's aims to assassinate leaders. And this Post says, according to current and former officials familiar with the matter, the U.S. feared Israel wanted to assassinate Iran's top negotiators as the Trump administration pursued a deal to end the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Israel has called a similar story a complete fabrication of reality. But what is your understanding of this allegation?
So yeah, that was a great story by the Post, and my colleagues at the Times as well reported something similar. I think what this shows us is that even though the U.S. and Israel embarked on this war together starting on February 28th and carried out the strikes, for the next few weeks together, their interests have really diverged quite a lot when it comes to Iran. The Memorandum of Understanding, the interim agreement that Iran and the U.S. signed a few weeks ago, that is something that is anathema to Israeli leaders. They believe that it's really a capitulation to the Iranian government and gives them way too many benefits. And so we see kind of in this one story that the same people that the U.S. is negotiating with and is signing these agreements with effectively are also being targeted by the Israeli government. And it's really a diverging of interest between these two allies that is kind of remarkable to me.
So at the onset of the U.S.-Iran war, the president said, and I'm paraphrasing here, when we're finished, take over your government, it will be yours to take. 127 days later, there's been no revolution. What did Donald Trump fundamentally fail to understand about Iran and its people?
Well, I think, it's hard for me to think of any precedent where a popular revolution has occurred during airstrikes. The actual mechanism for people to go out and sort of take over these institutions while they're worried about being killed by bombs, like that was quite never really explained. And then I think, if you kind of look back at the history of the Islamic Republic, when it is under an outside threat is sort of when it's able to most consolidate and solidify its power at home. And we really see this in the 1980s, when really shortly after the revolution in 1979, around a year and a half later, Saddam Hussein invaded and the Iran-Iraq war launches for the next 8 years. And, the leader of the revolution, Ruhollah Khomeini, he had a chance to end that war just a couple years in, with far fewer casualties and ultimate cost to the Iranian people. But he chose to keep that war going. And I think what history tells us is that it was a very useful tool for him and the other clerics that supported him to consolidate power and to push out their rivals. And I think understanding that history and understanding how the Islamic Republic uses the threat of an outside enemy to consolidate power at home is pretty critical to understanding how this government works.
I mean, a simple question, do the people of Iran have more freedom now than they did before the start of the war or not?
I think it's hard to argue that that's the case. I mean, we've seen executions pick up quite a lot. We've seen, according to Amnesty International, 6,000 arrests since the start of the war, often of dissidents, journalists, human rights activists. Just a few days ago, and my colleague and I reported on this for The Times, a few days ago, 2 environmental activists were rearrested after having already served quite a lengthy prison term over the past few years. They had not been engaging in any activities, any environmental activities, any sort of political work, and they were arrested, and we don't even know kind of on what charges or by what security force they were arrested. So I think the government has used the war to sort of justify a crackdown against dissent at home.
I want to ask you about this, your book. Quite a powerful history of the Islamic Republic, and you write that the revolution that was launched with egalitarian ideas that resulted in a mafia state. But your title also mentions hope, and I find that so curious. Where is the hope in Iran today?
I think what my co-author and I found over the course of reporting and researching this book is that the Iranian people continuously come back with different and new ways to express their dissent, and they don't give up. So I think, our title sort of is not just a reference to one revolution. It's both a reference to 1979, but then also efforts to really reform and really redefine what the Islamic Republic could be in the 1990s, efforts to sort of open up Iran's economy in the 2010s, and then, of course, the Woman Life Freedom Movement of 2022. And I think in each of these kind of examples, they're very different from each other, but they sort of all come from this very lasting motivation that the Iranian people have to contest what they are given by those in power. They don't just accept kind of whatever the government's perspective is, whether that was before the revolution or after. And I don't see any sign that that's going to simply go away. We see kind of that dynamism even today still.
Well, okay, hope is always a good thing, and I'm glad you bring it in your book. And thank you for the conversation, Yeganeh Torbati. Thank you so much for being with us here on The Holiday as well.